I'd like to call to order the regular meeting for Thursday, November 15th, 2018. I'd like to remind everybody, please silence your cell phones, any other electronic devices. And if you would like to speak on an item, please bring a blue slip to Miss Jessica prior to the item coming up. I'd like to have our invocation by Mr. Brame and our pledge by Mr. Andrew Pond.
Let's pray. Father God, we just love you. We just give you praise and glory for who you are. We thank you for all your many blessings that you lay upon each and every one of our lives today, Father. We just ask that the decisions we make tonight please you, and we just give you the praise. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Pick the colors.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, gentlemen. Item 3, roll call, please.
Yes, sir. Mr. Abshire?
Here.
Mr. Andrew Pond?
Here.
Mr. Brame?
Here.
Mr. Collins?
Here.
Mr. Farnum?
Here.
Mr. Guidry?
Here.
Mr. Guillory?
Here.
Mr. Landry?
Here.
Mr. Latour?
Here.
Ms. Mayo? Here. Mr. McMillan?
Here.
Mr. Scott?
Here.
Mrs. Trimmy was unable to attend this evening. Vice President White
Here.
and President Beers.
Here. Thank you. Item 4, consideration of approving payment of all current invoices and advise
Move on
regarding
that.
monthly
Second.
budget to actual comparisons. I've got a motion by Mr. Andrew Pont, a second by Mr. Collins. Any discussion? Any objection? Item carries. Item 5, take appropriate action on applications for liquor and beer permits. Mr. Crane.
Mr. President, we have 31 renewals tonight and 1 special
So
event
moved.
permit, and we recommend
Second.
they be approved.
Got a motion by Mr. McMillan and a second by Mr. Guidry. Any discussion? Any objection? Item carries. Item 6, consideration of approving the minutes of the regular meeting of the police jury dated October 18,
Move on.
2018.
Second.
Got a motion by Mr. White and a second by Mr. Latour. Any discussion? Any objection? Item carries. Item 7, consideration of approving the Budget Committee report dated November 15th, 2018. Mr. Farnum.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Budget Committee of the Police Jury met at 4 p.m. today, November 15th. The committee recommended approving the following items for parish gaming funds. Ward 4, District 13, $7,500 for the Sulphur Housing Christmas Giving Program. Ward 6 Fire Protection District Number 1, $65,000 for fire equipment. And Ward 6 Waterworks District Number 7 of Wards 4 and 6, $50,000 for the relocation of existing water lines on Edgerly Road and Holbrook Park Road. The committee also received a presentation of the proposed 2019 police jury budget from Administrator Brian Beam. The proposed police jury budget for 2019 is $244 million, which is a 4.5% increase from the 2018 budget of $233.5 million. 63% of the increase is due to capital projects such as road and bridge improvements, construction of new facilities, drainage, and other important investments. The operating portion of the budget is 3.6% increase over the current year, which is modest, especially with the growth in our environment. Property taxes are projected to increase by 4.6% in 2019, and sales tax revenues are anticipated to increase by 10.3%. The staff is anticipating that gaming revenue levels may decrease by 1.4% in 2019. The next Budget Committee meeting is scheduled for Thursday, December 6th at 5 p.m. for the purpose of holding a public hearing to receive public comment or input on the proposed 2019 budget. This is the end of my report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Farnum.
Move for approval.
Second.
We've got a motion to receive report, second by Mr. White. Excuse me, the motion was made by Mr. Farnum, seconded by Mr. White. Any discussion? Any objection? That item carries. Item 10, excuse me. Item 8, consideration of adopting pro se verbal and resolutions promulgating the results of the election held on November 6, 2018. A, Calcasieu Parish Courthouse Complex and Correctional Center, a special 3.27 mil tax for a period of 10 years. And B, Calcasieu Parish Public Library System, a special 5.99 mil tax for a period of 10 years. Got a motion by Mr. Landry, second by Mr. Latour. Any discussion? Any objection? That item carries. Item 9, consideration of adopting a resolution approving the industrial tax exemption contract between the state of Louisiana and Driftwood LNG LLC with respect to its manufacturing plant project located at 8,000 Global Drive in Sulphur. I've got a motion by Mr. Andrepont and a second by Mr. McMillan. Any discussion? Any objection? That item carries. Before item 10, I'd like to call on Mr. Gabb to provide a little clarification prior to the zoning requests.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just real brief, before we get into the zoning request, you may notice that some of the agenda wording has changed from previous agendas. The wording is simply meant to stress that the action being taken by the police jury is to approve rezoning request. It's not a reference to the Planning and Zoning Board. And so you'll notice it's been worded a little differently from previous agendas. And that's all it's meant to do, is just to stress that the action being taken is to approve, take action whether to approve or deny rezoning. So that's all I need to say, and as we get into the things, obviously you guys make the motions, we'll take them how they come, but the best and perhaps easiest motion might be a motion to approve rezoning on these types of requests.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. President.
Is there any discussion before we start? Is everybody clear on how we're going to proceed through this? Okay. So item 10, consideration of adopting an ordinance approving the following rezoning application: 750 Goodman Road in Ward 3, rezoned from agricultural to single-family residential to allow single-family residential development, 493 lots in Pine Shadows Estates. I have a motion to approve the rezoning by Mr. Collins and a second by Mr. Guidry. Is there any discussion? Any objection? That item carries. Item 11, consideration of adopting an ordinance approving the following rezoning application: 1750 Highway 109 South in Ward 7, rezoned from agricultural and central business commercial to recreational vehicle park to R-RVP to allow a recreational vehicle park, 65 recreational vehicle spaces, and 12 manufactured home spaces.
Moved up whole. Planning and zoning.
Okay, so,
Motion to rezone.
Motion to rezone.
Oh, sorry.
What was his motion?
Rezone. Or no. Never mind.
Mr.
We don't want to do that. They voted 3-4 and, okay. Well, we still got to make that motion. I'll just vote against myself. That's all you got to do.
And Mr. President, if I may.
That is how you want it done, is it
That is
not?
exactly how I'd like to
There
see
you
it
go.
done. And Mr. President, if I may, and I did not mean to confuse things or make things,
We
my
just
goal
vote
was.
yes every time.
my-
The
my
first
goal-
time around.
Right, but obviously, and Ms. Landry is correct, the motion to approve, but certainly, in making of a motion does not mean you're in support of it. You make the motion sometimes to get it on the floor to see it fail. So yes, still the motion would be proper.
okay, so Mr. Landry, would you like to keep
My
your...
motion was correct. We'll just leave it just like it is.
You're gonna make Mr. Landry moves to rezone, and Mr. McMillan seconds. Any discussion?
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Farnum.
Yeah, when we talked about this, we talked about making a motion to approve the rezoning, regardless of whether planning and zoning voted for or against it. Am I right? So this motion is to grant the zoning regardless of what, okay, I'm clear. So I just need to make sure I know how to vote.
Okay. So basically, we're gonna go straight to a roll call vote on this.
Well, I think we have speakers on this item.
Oh, that's right. Okay, first of all, I'd like to hear from the applicant, please.
She's back.
Good evening, Mr. President and the jury. My name is Robin Bassoni, 1010 Lakeland Drive, Lake Charles.
Good evening.
I'm really scared that now we're the first applicant with this new approve the motion thing. I think we'll get through this. I appreciate your time. The applicant is proposing 77 spaces on 7.42 acres. I'd like to explain that the current density, if we are approved for rezoning, the current density would allow for 161 spaces. So we're not asking to cram a lot of trailers into a small area. We're asking for 65 RV spaces and 12 mobile homes. We will meet all stipulations that the parish staff has laid out for us. We will go above and beyond that if that makes the project more acceptable to you. The frontage of the RV area is 230 feet off of Highway 109. The staff did not stipulate that we have to put wooden fencing across there, but we'll do that if it makes it more palatable to the jury. We will also add any landscaping that might help. That's not in the stipulations, but we're willing to add that. We're willing to commit to start construction immediately upon permitting. We're ready to go to engineering and get that runoff management plan designed. We'll meet any requirements that that drainage plan requires of us. The drainage is kind of separated. You'll hear from some people tonight about their drainage concerns. They are on the other side of Highway 109. We do not think our project will impact their drainage, and we're going to do whatever it takes to keep our runoff from affecting the surrounding drainage. The future for the greater Vinton area now includes that new mega site that you recently approved. What we hope is that this allows for a sustained economic growth for the area. We understand that there is RV park fatigue. The zoning board and you are tired of approving RV parks. And we understand that if there was a surge in need for RV spaces and then the economy goes back down, you're concerned about abandoned RV parks or what they become. We think that if Calcasieu Parish plays their cards right, our growth will be sustainable. We think that this RV park can serve the greater Vinton area and future economic growth for a long time. We also would like you to understand that you are not dealing with an owner-operator that will be away. The owner of the property lives immediately on site. The operator, her grandson, operates his business immediately adjacent to the site. He will be there to handle all concerns, and this will be a good, sound development that will be upkept properly. We understand there are traffic concerns. This is a state highway. Our highways have a lot of traffic. Interstate 10, when Interstate 10 has issues, people go around. We understand that. There's a concern about a bus stop in the immediate vicinity. Residents of this RV park will not be getting up to speed at that bus stop. It's in such a location that they'll just be departing or they'll be braking to enter the park. We think that the safety of, we of course are concerned about the safety of children getting on the bus as well, but we don't think that the residents of this RV park will impact that. Previous RV parks approved in the area, there was 2. One was approved greater than 18 months ago, has not even started. We don't know if it will be developed. The other one that has started construction is marketing themselves as a luxury RV resort. That is a different business model from this project. I will be available for any questions. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. 1 second, I think we may, Mr. Landry.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ms. Bassoni, when you first started speaking, I caught something about it's going to be less dense than what it could be, or maybe I misunderstood you.
No, that's
Could you
correct.
further explain that?
I checked with parish staff, and they have a square footage percentage that they'll take a piece of property if it's zoned for R1, R2, or RV park. And they'll divide out the square footage per RV park, so at 7.42 acres, divided by 2,000 square feet per space. I'm gonna get Wes to help me.
Yeah, Mr. Crank, go ahead.
Well,
Mr.
well,
Crane.
an RV space, the area that's required under the ordinance for an RV space is 2,000 square feet. And a mobile home is required 5,000 square feet.
So
So
the
you can-
comment is just, it's going to be less dense than what the ordinance would allow according to her site plan.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Scott?
You mentioned fatigue of the jury and the planning and zoning. This is an issue that we are gonna have some major discussions on in the very near future, I believe. Would you be willing to defer this action for a month or two to be able to see if there's anything that this jury would find a better way for this? Because if, just in case you were to fail tonight, it would take a year before you could come back and ask again. Is that something that your client would be interested in?
I think we'd be willing to wait a month if the jury felt like that would better serve you.
I
Or
can't say a
more?
month, or I'm just saying, you know, if it fails tonight, and I don't know if it will, I'm just speaking on, you know, as an opinion. If it was to fail tonight, you would basically have to wait a year again before you came back. If we deferred this for 60, 90 days, first of the year, to give us time to look at this issue, maybe there's some things that we could do to make this tolerable or not. I'm not making any promises.
Yes, you are correct. If we lose tonight, we have to wait a full year to apply for a rezoning. If the jury needs to address some things that might, I'm not sure I understand what the 60 to 90 days would do for your feelings about RV parks.
Well, we're government and we don't move tomorrow. I can move tomorrow, but, you know, as government, we have to go through the process of how we discuss and why we discuss. What are our concerns? We listen to the public. So, you know, there's a process that would have to take place for us to have that conversation legally. So it was just a question on my part. So I'll just leave it to the jurors. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Nope, we're good. Okay, so that is all that are for, that's, Mr. Form.
Thank you, Mr. President. Who lives in the house behind the site?
The property owner.
Property owners live behind the site, and the access is down through, looks like a corridor on the south end of the property?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Form. Okay, so we've got, one person that's gonna be representing the folks against, Miss Rebecca Coward. Okay. Name and address for the record, please, ma'am.
Rebecca Coward, 1753 Highway 109 South. I'm directly east of the proposed, or west of the proposed site. I'm here as the spokesperson for the group. If you're with us, please raise your hand. These are some of our neighbors that are in opposition of this. Let me start by saying I live right across the street from this. We just built our home 2.5 years ago. We put a lot of time and effort into choosing a style of home that's not best just for us, but best for our neighborhood. What can we do to improve our neighborhood, the face value, the property value? How can we contribute in a positive way? I have a picture of our home that I'd like to pass around. This is what the RV park would be sitting right in front of. They speak about a plan for a fence on the west side facing the road. I'm not quite sure what a 6-foot privacy fence will hide. I don't think it will do anything to aesthetically improve the area. You're still going to see the taller structures behind it. It's not going to hide anything. This addition would definitely aesthetically damage the character of our neighborhoods and reduce our property values. The safety of my children, she addressed that. I have concerns for that. I've watched numerous times, morning and afternoon, vehicles passing the school bus, stop lights, stop arms, everything out. They still go past the school bus where my children are walking. She's right. They're not going to be at maximum speed right there. They're going to be accelerating and decelerating right directly in front of our homes. That nuisance is not going to be pleasant at all when my children are trying to sleep, when we're trying to sleep, when the neighbors are trying to sleep. They're accelerating and decelerating right there. We have elderly in the neighborhood. It's quiet. She says it's not a neighborhood because there's a state highway, but we have a subdivided area on one side, on the west side of the road, as well as on the east side. This is a community. Call it what you will. The drainage. We flood. We're west of the property, we flood. All of our ditches fill up. We lose 2/3 of our yard every time there's a measurable rainfall. The drainage is on the west side, but all of it flows over to the east side. All of the drainage from our area on the west side and the east side all come together at Hamilton Road. It's not just isolated to, oh, it's on her side of the road. I've got pictures of drainage from the east side and the west side. I can pass those around. Our ditches are not adequate for any increased runoff. The more land that you take from us to absorb it, the more that we're going to suffer with additional flooding. We are not adequately drained over there. RV park fatigue. Let me start by saying right now we have it's 7/10 of a mile away from the site. It holds 20 RVs and 4 cabins. We have another one that's 9/10 of a mile away from the site. It's Double Downs. It was just approved about 8 months ago. It's not started construction, but it's approved for 114 RV spaces. It's a luxury resort. It's going to have a swimming pool, access to casino amenities. It's going to be appealing to those coming in. 3.1 miles away, Niblets Bluff, 52 RV park spaces. 3.5, Texas Pelican RV, 35 spaces. 3.7, Cajun Oasis, it was approved for 100 spaces. It's actually in process right now. They are working on that right now. It is going forward. 3.9 miles, Paradise RV, it's got 105 spaces and 17 cabins. And then 5.4 miles away, we have Vinton RV Park. That's over 550 spaces. Vinton's only got 3,300 people in it as of 2017 census data, 3,351. Community development should contribute as a benefit to the public. There's no clear added benefit for this to be part of our community. Right now, we don't have a need for the spaces that we've got. You can call any one of them. I did that today, 2 o'clock. Every one of them has at least one space available. Many of them have 10 to 15 available. There's not a need for an additional RV park in our community. Inviting an RV park in, you get crime. We have one deputy that patrols the area outside of the city limits. That's Edgerly, that's all of the area around the casino. We don't have the law enforcement presence to protect our property, to take care of any additional threat that this
Okay,
brings
you know,
in.
Go ahead and complete your thought, and just want to let you know.
That's what I've got. We can't support this manpower-wise on the law enforcement side. We don't have a need for it in the community at all.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Cowell. Does anybody have any questions for Ms. Cowell?
No, no questions for her, man.
Okay, so,
I had this. It's a map of all of the current RV parks. I'd like to pass that around too, and that's it.
thank you. Mr. Latour?
Yeah, first off, I'd like to say thank you. I mean, definitely, that's exactly what the citizens should do when something's coming to the community and you do not want it, and you did a great presentation. I mean, to me, I think like everybody says, it's, you know, we're saturated with these RV parks, and I definitely, if I lived there, I wouldn't want it in my community either. I hope that we look at what the planning and zoning recommendation was, and we, you know, vote our conscience, because, you know, these people came out to represent themselves, and I yield back, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Latour. So, any further discussion? Do we have a motion? We have a motion on the floor by Mr. Landry. So we will, it's a motion to uphold, to approve planning and zoning. Approve the rezoning, excuse me.
Approve reason.
We'll have a roll call vote. Excuse me.
Make sure everybody's clear on it. A vote yes means to approve the rezoning of the property. A vote no is to deny the rezoning.
That is correct. Okay, Madam Secretary,
Yes, sir. This will be a reverse roll. Call vote.
reverse.
Yes, sir. Mr. White?
No.
Mr. Scott?
No.
Mr. McMillan?
No.
Ms. Mayo? No. Mr. Latour?
No.
Mr. Landry?
No.
Mr. Guillory?
No.
Mr. Guidry?
No.
Mr. Farnum?
No.
Mr. Collins?
No.
Mr. Brain?
No.
Mr. Angelpont?
No.
And Mr. Abshire?
No.
The vote was unanimous, and the rezoning was not approved.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Angelpont.
Thank you, Mr. President. Twofold, Mr. Gaff, this new policy we have, where'd that come from?
I was trying to make things easier. We were trying to avoid the yes means no, no means yes vote from previous meetings.
Okay, it came from you, is all I'm asking.
It came from me. It did. It did.
Well, I'm glad I didn't say what I was initially saying.
It did come from me, yes.
Good, you answered my question. And while we're on the subject of RVs and rezoning, several meetings ago, Mr. Scott said he would not vote for any more. I just want you to know I'm joining your crusade because I'm not voting for any more either.
Thank you, Mr.
And I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Angelpont. Mr. Landry.
Thank you, Mr. President. All right, Mr. Gabb, now what you need to work on is we need to change our ordinance in such a way that when we approved an RV park for you 4 years ago and you still haven't done anything with it, it should revert back to the original zoning. So now how are you gonna do that?
Well, we could certainly.
Maybe Mr. Crane can help you.
And I would certainly recommend that be talked about at the Planning and Zoning Liaison Committee to introduce the idea of a new ordinance. Let staff could look at that and see what the pros and cons were to it and get that for the jury for a vote.
Go ahead, Mr. Crane, I can tell you just dying to say something.
I would agree with that. I think you can, we can probably look at it and come up with some language, or meet with the liaison group and figure out a way that, limit, if somebody's not gonna start a project, and we're rezoning a lot of these properties out there that we don't know whether they have intentions or not of developing, then we probably need to look at that.
Well, I'll make that as a formal request. Let's get the ball moving and let's work on that and get the thing going.
think we're gonna
Unless our
schedule-
goal, is to have the most RV parks out of any parish in the state. Now, if that's the case, I think we're well on our, we may win that. I don't know if you get an award for it or not, but.
I think we're already there.
We might be, we probably are already there.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Scott.
Please correct me, Mr. Gabb or Mr. Crane. I thought it was, once you rezone a piece of property, they had to do something on it within 1 year. Where did I get that thought process?
That's when you rezone to industrial,
Just industrial?
just industrial.
So maybe we do RVs only in industrial like we did main camps, and then that way so just a thought, anyway, thank you, Mr. President. It just-
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Mr. Guillory?
Thank you. While we're on that topic, Wes, that's one I've been talking to you about, and everybody, that after so many years, after the boom is gone, 20 years from now, about converting some of the property back. That's one of those things, I know I gotta go meet with you on, but that's one of the things we gotta look at too, that if they not holding at least 20% or so much, I don't know. That's just one thing I've been thinking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on. Item 12. Consideration of adopting an ordinance
Move to
approving the
approve.
following rezoning application 5815 Highway 171 North in Ward 1, rezone from agricultural to multifamily residential to allow multifamily residential development 9 duplexes. Got a motion to rezone by Mr. White and a second by Mr. Latour. Any discussion? Mr. Latour.
Yes, sir. I just want to, Mr. Crane, just to be sure, I talked to one of the neighbors there that the fence is going to go around the complete property or any residents around it. Is that so?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, that's all I had a question for. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Latour. Mr. Crane.
I just want to make sure that the motion was to include the conditions.
Correct.
Yeah,
I didn't. Yes. Okay, thank you.
More rewording to come.
yeah.
Mr. Gabb, catch that?
I mean, that's what I was gonna say. I mean, the motion should be.
With conditions.
To rezone with
With
stipulations.
conditions. Stipulations, yeah, we don't want to change too much. at one time.
condition.
Little bites, little bites. Okay, so, any further discussion on that? Any objection? That item carries. Item 13, consideration of adopting an ordinance approving the following rezoning application 5911
rezoning
Common Street
to
in Ward
I-1.
3.
Second.
Rezone from general commercial
And
to
amend
light industrial to
stipulate-
allow
that's what we're gonna have
industrial
to talk about
development, boat storage, and storage yard. I might hear you better now, sir.
All right, Mr. Gabb, because I wanna amend the stipulation, one of them also, but I also wanna add a stipulation, so I'm gonna just throw it out there and see if I cover it right. So, a motion to approve rezoning to I-1 and adjust stipulation number, and amend stipulation number 3 to east side fence only to have the slats and the hurricane, and then add a 6-foot privacy fence to the west, south, and north sides. Nothing to be stacked above the 6-foot fence, and that's my that is my motion. Covered it?
You did?
Yeah. Nope. Yeah, here you go. That is my motion.
That's two separate motions, is it not? I mean, he's got one in the motion, and then he has an amendment.
It can be made as one motion.
You'll have to,
It can be made, it's been made as one motion. It's a motion to approve rezoning with conditions, with condition 3 being modified as
then he
stated.
changed the conditions.
He can do that as one motion.
So then if that doesn't pass, we just start over again.
Right now, it hasn't gotten a second.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
So I've got a motion to rezone with amendments by Mr. Scott and a second by Mr. Latour. Is that correct? Any discussion?
I think there's a speaker.
Oh, excuse me, one of those. Got a speaker. Mr. Kelby Shows?
Yeah, that's right.
I know.
I got it.
Okay, right, real quick.
This is for Mr. Scott. What do you want that fence to be made out of? Because I've been burned on that before. Be specific.
Just wooden privacy fence?
Okay.
Dog ear.
Dog ear.
I don't care,
Be
cat ear,
specific.
dog ear,
I've
just
ended
a
up
wooden
with,
privacy fence.
I've ended up with a rusty metal fence because we just said privacy fence.
There you go. 6-foot privacy, wooden privacy fence. Thank you for clarification.
And which sides did you mention
The
again?
south, the north, and the west side, which faces Gulf Highway. So the east side would face rear.
And the other fence that's already there?
No, he can remove it or leave it on. I mean, it.
I just wanna make sure I know what's in the motion.
Can I? Yeah,
Mr. Guidry.
There's a fence that's existing right now?
6 foot
6 foot?
chain link with barbed wire on top. Yep,
And you, what's the need for a privacy fence?
don't know. I really don't know. At
But
the
first of
junkyard,
all,
hang on, let me start over.
Name and
Kelby
go ahead.
Shows,
I missed that. Go ahead.
7833 Gossett Road, Lake Charles, 70605. Go ahead.
No, I was just listening
Yeah,
to
it's a
what
6
was
foot
said. 6 foot
Chain
fence?
link fence all the way around it. Don't understand why we need a wood fence. You know, a wood fence, 5 years from now, it's gonna be rotted down and look, you know, not very well. And 500 foot down the road is a junkyard. I don't understand why. You know, I'm in the construction business. Every part and piece that is left over from a job, I may need on the next job, because it may take 2 or 3 weeks to get it. Just like that junkyard right down the road. Those cars are junk to some people, but to him, they're valuable assets to his business, because he pulls parts off of them, everything else. So I really don't understand nothing above the 6 foot. I really don't understand that, and the privacy wooden fence around it. If I can put up an engineered cloth or vinyl slats that is 95% privacy, I really don't understand why we want a wood fence. And Mr. Scott's saying on the east side, well, there's a house behind us on the east side, about 200 foot behind us. So what are we trying to hide here? If we're going industrial, I really don't understand why. You know, I've been in business for 25 years. I plan on staying here. I'm not here for the boom. You know, I work other places in Lake Charles. You know, all we don't even have power, don't need power, don't need lights. It's just storage. And in between jobs where I keep my equipment, you know, and my extra parts. You know, I can make it look better. I really don't think there's any need for a wood fence around 3 sides, you know?
Okay, so, Mr. Landry?
So if you do the slats, you're gonna do it all the way
All the way around,
and,
yep.
and it'll hide the
That's
the
right.
house that's in the back. Okay, I just wanted to make
I can go all the way around it if needed. I hate to tear down a good chain link fence for a wooden fence. You know, it just don't make any sense to me. And it's 6 foot, my crane's 10 foot tall. If it's in between jobs, I'm gonna have it parked there, so, you know. Would you rather me have to move out completely and just let the old car wash sit there and, you know, the frame is above 10 foot, it's 15 foot, you know, so I just don't really understand it. And
So-
eventually I plan on building somewhere, you know, but I don't wanna do it right now. I'm so busy I can't do nothing, you know, so I just don't understand the fence.
Just to clarify, the 6 foot chain link fence is there, you're gonna go ahead and slat the whole perimeter of the property.
Yeah, slatted or, something
already
engineered
existing.
for, you know, whatever's the best for the, you know, that's yours. The 6 foot, anything above 6 foot, that won't work. I mean, I just, you know, I could stand up a timber beside the fence, 8 foot, it'd be above it, you know.
Okay, thank you, Mr. White. Mr. Gabb, so we're basically going to,
Are there any more questions?
are there any more questions for Mr. Shows? Mr. Scott?
I've heard a lot of questions. I haven't heard anybody ask me if they'd like an answer to all these different questions, because I might have answers if y'all would like to hear them, but
I would like to hear 'em.
I don't have to, but I would need
I would
someone
like to
to
hear 'em.
ask me, because there are a lot of questions. I just want each question asked to me, and I will speak directly to each one if he would like. That's totally up to Mr. President. That's my discussion.
Stand by. Go ahead.
Before the jurors start discussion amongst themselves, are there any more questions for this speaker? Or maybe he can go back to the audience, I take it?
Do we have any questions for the speaker? Okay, no, we do not.
Is there any further discussion on the motion at hand right now?
Is there any further discussion on the motion at hand right now? Mr. Latour?
Mr. Scott, would you be okay with amending the fence with the, what he's talking about, netting it or some kind of slats, just out of curiosity?
Well, since you asked,
Okay.
Gulf Highway is one of our major thoroughfares, and we are starting in the very beginning of next year to begin to look at an overlay district on Gulf Highway. We have asked everyone that has come for a rezoning in the past year and a half to put up these wooden privacy fences, including Southside Machine Works down the road. We just had a condemned house off of Gulf Highway that they tore down and put up a privacy fence to help the neighbors out. So the little brewery that we approved, they were okay with putting up a wooden privacy fence. So this is not out of the norm. This is a precedent that we have set, and this would be conducive to what we are going to be asking people to do on Gulf Highway. So it has nothing to do with, you know, I already have a certain kind of fence. It has to do with the type of situation that we are trying to build on Gulf Highway to be a certain look. So that's where the wooden privacy fence, that's how I would answer that question.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, sir. Mr. Landry.
I have a comment on that. You know, we talk about the overlay district, but the fact is that ordinance is not passed. So we really can't hold anybody to something that we haven't passed yet. And it may come up in the future, and it might pass, and it might not. You know, what's unique about it, it's the only closed-down car wash on the Gulf. I mean, that's what it is. It's a closed car wash. And from what he's willing to do, I think it's gonna look a whole lot better than it does now or that it has in the past. So that's what makes it unique. Some of those other cases was a ground-up deal, and of course, they didn't have a chain link fence there to begin with. They wasn't having to tear a fence down to put a privacy fence in its place. So I would say that's what makes this different than those other cases that you mentioned.
Thank you, Mr. Landry. Mr. Mr. McMillan.
I'm all right.
In the words of you did wave your hand. Go ahead, Dennis Scott.
Stipulations are put in place so that we can do the best for our constituents in any given day. So regardless of talking about the overlay in the future or now, we can request things, and people that choose to abide by those understand that there's a reason we ask for that. So that's all I'd say from the overlay and the stipulation part of it.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
There.
I did raise my hand, but Mr. Latour asked the questions that I was gonna ask, so I didn't, but instead of the wood fence, would you be okay with slats all the way around at this point in time, or are you adamantly trying to push for the wood fence, I guess would be my question to Mr. Scott?
I'm just gonna say, you can drive by any hurricane slatted fence, and as you drive by, it is visible. I would challenge any of you to look at hurricane slatted fences. You can see right through them unless you stand in front of it and don't move. As you drive by these hurricane slatted fences, you can see through them. It's just too much visibility through there. This facility has been an eyesore for many, many years. The way to correct this is to try to get it into compliance, which we are doing, which it has been so far out of compliance for years, which is why we're here. This is more than the fence. This is a compliance issue that has not been done for years and been let go. So, does that answer your question?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Guidry.
Mr. President, I'm gonna pass.
Mr. Latour.
Okay, I've heard everything in which this is not my district, and I'm a strong believer in which, since I first got elected, that everyone elected to their area is a representation that their constituents have voted in, and if Dennis wants this for his district, I think that we should support him. If we would prefer to have this in our district, that's our right. But if he's elected, he knows what his people want, I think we should support him in this action. I yield back, just want to make that statement.
I called a question.
Do we have anyone here against this? Well, no, we don't have any slips, so. What? Hang on, we got a list. Yes, Mr. Foreman.
Thank you. The stipulation about stacking stuff, I can understand, you know, if you're stacking product or pieces or parts up above the fence, it kind of eliminates the purpose of the fence. But, like he was saying, he has a crane. Would that fall under the same thing, or?
No, that's,
You could have a crane in there and it could have a boom up, but you just can't stack drums and whatever you're gonna stack in there, boats or whatever he's gonna have, until they stick up higher to the fence.
is that a question?
Yeah, that's a question to Dennis.
We've done the same thing with Alfred Miller on Lake Street. You're gonna see all the cranes and those kind of things, but it's to keep from that stacking effect. So it has nothing to do with equipment and cranes of that nature, trailers. It has to do with stacking construction debris, that's all. So that would specifically speak to the debris.
If I may. I completely understand that, because I have a facility that backs up to a neighborhood and they stack crates on top of crates on top of crates, and they're 6 foot above the top of the fence. So I completely understand what you're talking about. I was just trying to clarify the crane issue that he was talking about, where he'd have to boom it down, leave it down, or whatever. Okay, I'm good, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Landry?
Actually, I was gonna mention what Mr. Farnham said. I mean, if that restriction is that nothing can be above the fence, I mean, it's kind of, what's the point? You know, I mean, if zoning it industrial, because obviously the crane or what have you. I would ask Mr. Shows a question, if he could come back up to the microphone. I've never driven by there and seen anything stacked up that high. That stuff is normally low.
It's down on the ground.
The
on
only
dunnage.
stuff that I've seen that's been tall has been equipment.
Like right now, I got a forklift in there, my crane's on a job. You know, I have a 30-foot Connex, you know, but it can be set down, but it's still gonna be 3 foot above the fence, you know.
I mean, have you ever stacked anything
No.
above the fence? So
No.
that's really not an
No.
issue, I don't think. Okay. thank
And
you.
my statement is, you know, I'm not the smartest guy,
One
but
second, we got
Got some more questions.
a question, Mr. Scott. Do you have a question for?
I'll wait and let him speak, maybe.
Okay, go ahead.
you know, all those
You have a
lots.
question for
Oh,
Mr. Shower?
Go ahead.
Yeah, the only problem, let me ask this question.
Okay.
Does this fence enclose your whole property?
Yes. It's got 3 gates on it. Two that access common and one that access the road.
No one can come in or out of this property,
No.
it's locked down and
Yep.
everything. So you would have to meet Mr. Scott's request, you would have to take down the entire fence
Yeah.
to
take
meet
down
the
that-
request as to what he's asking
That's right.
tonight? And it's a perfectly good fence.
Perfectly good fence, you know. Then somebody can come through and just take some screws out and get in there and steal my stuff.
On most of the situations we deal with, even with Mr. Farnham, there's been no fence and we've requested it, and I can see that. If you wanna put up a privacy fence, if nothing else is existing there, I can see the reason
Yeah.
for that, but you've got something there and you're willing to slat the entire fence?
And just like Mr. Scott said, I can even go above and beyond. I can put the mesh netting behind the slats. If he's worried about what percentage, the slats is about 75% visual. You know, the wire mesh, I can get up to 95%, 98%, where you can't see through it. You know, and we're zoning, just like Mr. Landry said, we're zoning industrial. If you go to Atlanta, Houston, anywhere, majority of the industrial sites is fenced in with chain link fence. You know, I know different sections. I understand Alfred Miller, he's in a residential really, and it looks nice what he done. But Common Street is different. You know, it's completely, and if you want industrial and commercial to come in on Common Street, they don't want to build fences, especially wood fences. If you've ever owned a wood fence, you have to work on it about every other week to keep the slats nailed on. You know, and they really don't look that good.
Mr. Scott?
I'm only gonna speak to the fence issue. I've had wooden fences for 20 years on my property, still in great shape. It depends on if you take care of your fence and you put up a fence that's worthy of staying together. There's lots of your neighbors and commercial, so fences will stay together if you put a fence up. I mean, it happens every day. The meshing issue, I mean, I could be open to suggestions. Do you own this property?
No, I do not own a property.
Mr. Gabb, how can I be, should the owner of this property be the one here trying to, or how
I'm
does this
speaking for
work?
PHA, the owner.
The restrictions you place on the property follow the property.
I mean, the owner, you don't think he would want us, so,
If the owner had a say, he certainly could be here.
but he's okay with the way it is?
If
So-
the applicant is
So,
made the application.
so literally, for years, it's been out of zoning. I just want to clarify this. So for years, this property has been being used outside of zoning, the zoning that it's supposed to be. Because this area was targeted, because of how absolutely atrocious it looked as you drive by, there were several complaints and they were let go by for many years. It got to the point to where this is where we are now, and it was, okay, this place has to be rezoned. It's not even being used correctly. I've done nothing more than ask this gentleman to do exactly what we ask anybody else to do. 6-foot privacy fence. He's a business owner. I understand a perfectly good fence being torn down, but I am looking for the betterment in the future. And, yeah, we can vote it up or down, but I'm gonna stick to the 6-foot wooden privacy fence. And I just think it's the right thing to do for that area. Thank you, Mr.
Call
President.
for the question.
Thank you. We have a call for the question.
You did, Mr. Anderson.
Apparently. So, we will, no further discussion. We will call the question.
And we vote on the whole thing the way he stated it and not the amendment separately.
There's been no motion to amend what Mr. Scott has already moved. So there's no amendment to that motion. So the motion on the floor right now is motion to approve with conditions.
So we either pass it and then we come up with another one if that doesn't,
Well, if you,
or do we need to amend it first?
if you are against the stipulations that Mr. Scott has done, the proper course would be to move to amend the main motion. So if you are against a wooden fence, the proper motion would be a motion to amend.
Then
the
I
main
make a motion to amend the main motion
I second it.
to where the fence would have slats, preferably in a earth tone color of brown or, what all colors they come in, Mr. Crane? What do you think? What would you like? Brown, tan? I know they come in gray.
And Mr. Landry, you could just reinstate the stipulation as number 3, I believe.
It's already there. Well, but no, I don't, we're gonna add the privacy slats in an earth tone color, if possible, with the mesh behind the fence, which will get us to that 90-something%.
If not more.
one motion on the floor.
That's just an amendment. So now we have to vote on the amendment before you do the main motion.
We've got a
I did already.
second, we've got a motion by Mr. Landry to approve the rezone with, excuse me, to amend
The main motion.
the main motion, which was Mr. Scott's motion, rather than the wooden fence. Mr. Landry would prefer the metal slats in an earth tone color. And we have a second by Mr. Guidry.
And the mesh.
And the mesh.
In the earth tone.
Any discussion? Mr. Scott?
Mr. Gabb, I just have to ask this question. If there's something that my brother-in-law is approaching this body for, can I vote on it? Can I,
It depends on what the interest would be.
well, if this property is gonna go up in value because there is something that is actually being now done to it, is that an ethics?
I'd have to know more than that. I'd have to know what the interest was, what his role was, and if there's a financial gain, then perhaps, but I'd need to know more.
All right,
I'm confused.
thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Scott.
You could call the ethics board.
Well, he's my brother-in-law? Well, I'm confused.
I don't know, I don't get it either.
Well, hey, gentlemen, we got point of order, just, so we are,
If there's no more discussion on the amendment to the main motion, we could vote on that amendment to the main motion,
okay, so if there's no more discussion to the main motion,
the amendment.
the amendment, excuse me, we can vote on that amendment, which was Mr. Scott's amendment.
Mr. Landry.
Mr. Landry's. Okey dokey. Madam Secretary.
Yes, sir. Mr. Abshire?
Explain.
The amendment to the motion, to the original motion, is to, if I understand correctly, is to require a fence with slats,
Final slats.
vinyl slats, thank you, Mr. Guidry, in earth tone color, if possible, with mesh behind the slats, on all property lines.
Yes.
Yes.
And a vote yes would be to approve Mr.
To
Landry's.
approve that amendment, yes, sir.
Yes.
Only, just the amendment.
Only, yes, sir. Mr. Abshire?
Yes.
Mr. Enterpine?
Yes.
Mr. Brain?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Farnum?
No.
Mr. Guidry?
Yes.
Mr. Guillory?
Yes.
Mr. Landry?
Yes.
Mr. Latour?
No.
Ms. Mayo?
No.
Mr. McMillan?
No.
Mr. Scott?
No.
Mr. White?
Yes.
There were 8 yeas, 5 nays. The vote on the amendment carried.
Now, I would like to withdraw my motion, my original motion, and disapprove zoning to I-1 for that.
Second.
Well, unfortunately, you can't withdraw the motion. Once the motion's made, it belongs to the police jury. So that main motion still needs to be acted on.
And you can't make a motion to disapprove. You just went over that.
Just have to vote
So
no.
just vote no.
So right now, the main motion as amended, if there's no further discussion, can be acted on.
So, Madam Secretary, we'll call to vote for the main motion
As amended.
As
The main
amended.
motion.
as
is-
amended.
Yes, sir. The main motion as amended is to approve the rezoning of the property to I-1 with the amendment that there be a vinyl, a fence with vinyl slats in earth tone colors if possible, with mesh behind the slats along all property lines of the development. Okay, and let's see, we'll start with, this will be a reverse roll call this time. Mr. White?
Yes.
Mr. Scott?
No.
Mr. McMillan?
No.
Ms. Mayo?
Yes.
Mr. Latour?
No.
Mr. Landry?
Yes.
Mr. Guillory?
Yes.
Mr. Guidry?
Yes.
Mr. Farnum?
No.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Excuse me, Mr. Brain?
Yes.
Mr. Anderpont?
Yes.
And Mr. Abshire?
Yes.
Okay, the motion carried 9-4. 9 yeas, 4 nays. So the property was rezoned with that amendment.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Item 14, consideration of adopting an ordinance authorizing the purchase of property located at 1708 North Hillman
Move on
Lane,
item
Westlake,
14.
Second.
through funding received from the FEMA Flood Mitigation Assistance Program. I got a motion by Mr. McMillan and a second by Mr. Scott. Any discussion? Mr. Scott?
I just want to add to this that when we purchase these properties and we actually remove them and we leave these open space, statistically proven now, open space is the best way to protect ourselves against floods. It is now proven, that's a fact, so that is the way that the government is beginning to lean with their money from the federal. Open space, so y'all remember that term, you're gonna hear it more and more in the very near future. Open space is the best way to become resilient. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Any further discussion? Any objection? Item carries. 15, consideration of adopting an ordinance approving the sale of adjudicated property located on South Global Drive in Ward 4
Move on 15.
to the Lake Charles
Second.
Harbor and Terminal District in the amount of $180,000. Got a motion by Mr. White, a second by Mr. Latour. Any discussion? Any objection? Item carries. 16, consideration of adopting resolutions approving the
I'm on
following
16 of
items
both bullets.
related to the Calcasieu Parish Police Jury Section 125 Flexible Benefits Plan. A, approving an amendment to the police jury's cafeteria plan for the purpose of matching the IRS standards effective January 1, 2019, and B, approving adoption agreements between the police jury and special service districts allowing for participation by the district. I got a motion by Mr. McMillan, second by Ms. Mayo. Any discussion? Any objection? Item carries. 17, consideration of adopting
17,
resolutions for
all
each of the following items
Second.
as requested by the Human Services Department. A, approve a cooperative endeavor agreement between the police jury and the Louisiana Housing Corporation for housing counseling services. And B, approve the submittal of a grant application to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. I got a motion by Mr. Collins and a second by Mr. Guidry. Got any discussion? Any objection? Item carries. 18, consideration of adopting a resolution approving an extension to the janitorial services contract and authorizing the parish purchasing agent to advertise for requests for proposals for janitorial services for multiple parish properties. Got a motion by Mr. Guillory and a second by, Mr. Guillory and a second by Mr. Guidry. Any discussion? Any objection? That item carries. 19, no action is necessary. The staff requests this item be deferred. 20, take appropriate action on proposals received for uniform rental services for use by police jury departments and various special service districts. After review of the proposals, the staff recommends that the proposal of UniFirst Corporation be accepted. Got a motion by Mr. White, second by Mr. Guidry. Any discussion? Any objection? That item carries. 21, consideration of adopting resolutions accepting the following projects as substantially complete. A, 3001 Industrial Avenue Canopy Project. And B, 901 Lakeshore Drive Building, 9th floor improvements project. Got a motion by Mr. White and a second by Mr. Guidry. Any discussion? Any objection? That item carries.